Okay, welcome back, my friends. Once again, we're here with Pastor Bruce Dowell, and we've been talking about the Ten Commandments. And in our last session, we were talking about the Shabbat, how important and how holy it is, how holy God made it to be. We realize that it is the one day that it's really set apart and a day for a double blessing. And it's the only day for the double blessing. So are we really observing it out of tradition? No, we're observing it because that is what God has commanded us. Again, we emphasized it in the last session, but remember, you can worship on any day, but the Shabbat is special, holy, and needs to be set aside. So, Pastor Bruce, where else do you think we need to go on this, and how do you think we need to get our listeners and our viewers more aware of what this really means?
Well, Doug, we left off by talking about the idea that the Sabbath day was literally created outside of time and space.
Yes.
So in other words, it's created holy, separate from all the other 6 days. So God has established time in those 6 days. Okay? Then He creates the Shabbat outside of that. It's holy, it's separate, it's apart from. That's in chapter 2 of Genesis. And then in chapter 3 we have the fall.
Right.
And because view it like this, you've got your days of your week is right here. The fall affects all of this, but your Sabbath is out here.
That's important, and it's a very interesting fact.
Yeah.
When you realize that because God realized that the fall was going to take place, in order to keep it holy or separate, He created it separate.
The only thing on planet Earth that is not affected by the fall is Shabbat.
Wow. That really makes you think. Yeah, absolutely.
Now, do bad things happen on the Shabbat? Of course they do. But spiritually, positionally speaking, and remember, when we read the Word, we read everything from position and experience.
Right.
Positionally, Shabbat is in a category unto itself.
Right, absolutely.
It's the only thing in our known universe that isn't affected by the fall.
Correct.
So you think about that. So if it's not affected by the fall positionally, wouldn't that be the logical choice for the day of worship?
Absolutely.
As opposed to trying to worship God through a veil of fallenness,
right.
Which God still shows up,
yeah,
obviously.
Well, He shows
up. But what if we didn't have that veil? See what I'm saying?
Also says it's a day when the gates are open.
It does. The day, we're told that all through the Word. Ezekiel pops into mind. The gates are open on the Sabbath and the new moon.
And the new moon, right.
Rosh Chodesh, which, by the way, we just celebrated last night.
Yes.
So today is actually Rosh Chodesh.
Correct.
So this is a day that, according to the Bible, the gates of heaven are open. So now, that's all we're told.
True.
We're not told what that means. Like so many, we've been talking about that.
That's true.
We've got to go to God and go, well, okay, Lord, what does it mean the gates are open? I thought I had access at all times now through Messiah. But obviously, if they're open on Shabbat and Rosh Chodesh, the reverse of that, the inverse of that is...
They're closed on the other days.
They're closed on the other days.
Yes.
Right? Now, what does all that mean? Well, that's what you got to get with God and figure out.
Correct.
And it may mean something different for you than it does for me.
Yes.
And that's okay. But there is a difference.
There is a difference.
Okay? So, this is why we can say Shabbat carries a double blessing with it. There's a blessing on all the days when we get together with God, but there's a double blessing when we get together on the Shabbat.
Correct.
Make sense?
Yes.
So it's created outside time and space. It's a place and a time that the Father calls us into His house, that His house might be made full.
Right.
That we can have unified, holy time and place together.
Wow.
The only place there is.
Right.
And the only time there is. So I hope for our listeners, I hope that, that's a brief overview of time and space continuums and Shabbat and all that.
Right.
But I would encourage everyone that's listening to take that to heart and study on that and see what you come up with and see what that means to you, because it has very real consequences to it, if you know what I mean. So we have this double blessing. Now, the Shabbat is also interesting. It's the only one of the 10 Commandments that is a ritual.
That is interesting in itself.
Yeah. So many people think that the commandments are all about these rituals. And of course, most of the Levitical commandments dealing with the Levitical priesthood, they are
true.
Ritual in nature, because they were responsible for the rituals taking place in the temple environment.
Right.
So they're very ritual.
Correct.
Obviously. And of course, as we know, many of those don't even apply to us today because they're temple dependent.
True.
So because there's no temple, the commandment there becomes kind of redundant, or
that's true. It does.
not redundant, but mute.
Right.
Becomes a mute point. So this is the only commandment that is ritual in nature. And ritual, by definition, means something that you do over and over and over again, right?
Right.
Ritualistic, that's what it is. Well, what do we do on the Shabbat? We go to the house of worship.
Right.
Now, this affects so many things, because when you go into the house of worship, according to Malachi, you're supposed to bring your tithe.
Right.
Bring it to the storehouse. That's the house of worship.
Correct.
Right? And God will open the floodgates. Now, if this all happens in this specific time and place, there's actually outside time and space.
Right.
And there's a double blessing associated with it. You do the math.
Right. Exactly.
Which day do you want to worship on this day because it's traditional? And I'm referring to Sunday there, by the way.
Right, right.
Or do you want to worship on this day, Shabbat, because that's what the Bible teaches, and teaches as a double blessing?
Right.
You choose.
Yeah, exactly.
And God will go with your choice. But I don't know, if I was investing my money and I was guaranteed a 10% return here, but I was guaranteed a 20% return here for the same investment of time, energy, and resource, which one am I going to do?
Right.
Well, it's a no-brainer.
It's a no-brainer.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
And so that's what the Lord's saying. Well, you choose. You can do this. If you're so hung up on your tradition, that's fine. I'll show up. I'll be there. I'm always there.
Yep.
He's there even when you're not. But if you want to do it on the day that I prescribed, here's the blessings that carries with it.
Right, exactly.
So
exactly.
We really have to get into that frame of mind where we start looking at it that way. It's not something, well, if I don't go on Shabbat, then I'm cursed. Well, no, you're not.
No, it's
People that worship on Sunday are not cursed people. That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
That goes into what we were talking about earlier about people that set themselves up as prophets that aren't prophets.
right. That's true.
And don't know what they're talking about. God doesn't curse His own people. Okay? And I realize there's scripture where, there's some curses that go out and stuff. I
True,
understand all that. But in general, God does not curse His children because they have got things mixed up.
Right.
I mean, I would ask everybody that's listening to us, does anybody within sound of my voice, are you not mixed up on something?
Well, yeah.
I mean, come
Absolutely.
on. We are mixed up. But is not a father pleased when his son or his daughter is attempting to do the right thing, but still falls short, but is attempting it?
Exactly.
You're very pleased. You don't...
And you encourage them.
You encourage them. Look, it's okay. You're going to do better next time.
Yes. Absolutely.
Well, if that's how we are, how much more is our Heavenly Father like that? He doesn't beat you up because you didn't attain to perfection
Right.
the first time out. I mean, if he does, none of us are going to survive this ordeal. Really.
Well, that's true, because I don't think anybody's attained perfection except Yeshua.
I think we get so crazy with some of this stuff.
Right.
We've got to relax. The New Testament says, just having done all, stand firm. So I always, Kathleen and I always relate this for ourselves. We say, look, just do the best you can do, and then stand on that.
Yes.
And you know it's not complete. Come on. You know it's not 100%.
Right.
But if it's the best, then you ask the question, well, is it really your best? No, it's never really your best. Let's just clear the air right now.
Right, right.
But when we say that, you're trying to put forth the effort.
Correct.
Could you do better? You can probably always do better.
Yeah.
But you know what? We have limits. God knows that. As long as we're moving in the right direction, I personally am convinced God's pretty happy with us.
Right. That's true.
You know, and that's a general statement, moving in the right direction, because most of who you are can be moving in the right direction, and you can have these wild hairs fly,
That's true. That's true.
that are kind of bugging out over here and over here. But
Right.
if you're going in basically the right direction, I personally think the Father's happy.
I think you're right.
My God's a God of love. That doesn't mean He overlooks our sin.
Correct.
He doesn't. He deals with it. But it also means He doesn't beat you up
Right.
if you're not exactly hitting a bullseye every time.
That's true.
In fact, when I hit the bullseye, I get really excited because I don't hit it that often. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, if I'm on the hay, I'm feeling pretty good, and if I hit the target, I'm going, ooh, okay, I'm doing all right here.
Yeah, yeah.
You hit a bullseye, it's like, wow, let's stop right now while we're ahead.
Absolutely.
So I think we really have to lighten up on ourselves and others, and especially in the Messianic, because a lot of times we can get a little critical, and we can get a little bit judgmental about people that maybe aren't doing it the way we do it.
Yes, and that's very true.
And I think that's sad. I think we really just need to be encouragers for each other. Even if you think somebody's missing the boat, just encourage them.
Right, exactly.
You don't need to straighten them out. It's not your job.
That's true.
That's what the Spirit does, and He does it well.
Yes.
No one escapes.
That's true. Now, I do have one question before we get off of the Shabbat. It's the only one of the 10 commandments that I see that mentions the stranger dwelling with you. So how do you think that really ties in, and how should we take that?
Did you have some thoughts you wanted to throw out there first?
Well, are we responsible then for the, like if we have guests over, to explain to them the Shabbat or invite them to service? And I do. That's the way I feel. But if they're really against it, how do we really relate to that? What is our obligation in this as far as the stranger among us? And it really kind of has me wondering at times.
All right. The word sojourner is actually the Hebrew word ger.
Yeah.
G-E-R, ger. literally means a temporary inhabitant, a newcomer lacking inherited rights.
Okay.
So if you're lacking inherited rights, I discern that to mean that we're talking about a non-believer here.
Okay. Or would it just be a Gentile?
A Gentile believer?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think you could loosely say that.
Okay.
But and there's so much in semantics here.
Yes, there is, and that's why I had the question.
You know, really, I used to say there's two kinds of people in the world: those that are saved, those that are not saved.
Right.
Okay, that keeps it pretty simple. Then when we came into the Messianic, there's two kinds of people in the world: Jews and everybody else.
Right.
That's Jews and Gentiles. But the problem with that concept is now in both categories you have believers and non-believers.
Absolutely.
So now you really have four categories, not two.
Correct.
So you have Jewish believers, Jewish non-believers, Gentile believers, Gentile non-believers. For me personally, I'm kind of going back now to the two.
Believers and non-believers?
Yeah.
Okay.
So believers being God's people, and I'll just call that Israel.
Okay.
Not in the Jewish form.
Right.
And just for the sake of this argument and for the sake of this semantics, I would have to say that this would be a non-believer living with you.
Okay. And that makes sense.
And the next definition is a foreigner in Israel, though conceded rights. So again, no rights there, because when you become a believer, you inherit scriptural rights.
Well, that's true.
And privilege.
And I was looking at it as rights within Israel. And
yeah,
there's a slight difference there.
There really is, and I'm certainly not going to stand on a soapbox and say I'm right.
Well, I understand.
This is where I am now, and this is a migrative move for sure.
Right.
I
Exactly.
mean, this was one of those fluid things that is your understanding is forever changing.
Right. Exactly.
And of course, we get into so many hassles and arguments in the Messianic over the semantics.
Yes.
And the problem is we're not comparing apples with apples. You know, what one word means to me might mean something different to you.
Well, and as you
close but different.
And as you just explained, even your definition has changed a couple times.
It has.
So yeah, I can very much understand that.
And I'm trying to simplify my life. So for me, rather than having the four categories, I like the two categories.
Right. It just makes it simpler.
It's just simpler.
Right.
Believers and non-believers. Whether the believers are Jews or Gentiles makes absolutely no difference. A believer is a believer.
Correct.
In fact, Paul gets into it and he says, look, there is no male, no female, no Jew, no Gentile, no free, no slave in Messiah.
Right.
So he does away with those other
Correct.
The four definitions. See, because it gets way too confusing for us. So I think what you're talking about, what I would be talking about here, although I think I know where you're coming from, should Gentile believers be keeping the Shabbat? I believe absolutely.
I think so too.
And if we view ourselves as spiritual Israel, which is what Paul calls us in Galatians,
right,
then the entire word is for the entire group.
Exactly.
Because there is only one group. And he expounds on this in the Brit HaShah by saying there's one God, one Lord, one Spirit, one faith, one hope, one baptism. One.
Right.
It's all one. So if that's true, then we are one people.
Yes.
Right?
True. Well, that's God's plan for us to become a Had.
A Had. That's his biggest desire.
Right.
So I think, whatever you call it, we don't become Jews, and Jews don't become Gentiles.
Right.
Just like a male doesn't become a female, and a female a male.
Right.
A Jew doesn't become Gentile. Gentile doesn't become Jew. Free doesn't become slave. Slave become, So there's not that change like that. We're just all in one pot, so to speak. And so the secret sauce, the word, is poured into that pot.
Right.
And mixed in. And I think and of course the one law, two law, all of that stuff in the Messianic it's enough to make you crazy.
Well, that's true.
And I think we're straining at gnats with all of it personally. I think you just need to read God's word and apply it to your life.
Well, that's the basics, yeah, absolutely.
To me that just sounds so simple,
It is.
So I don't want to strain over, well, is this part for me or not?
No,
it's all for me.
It's all for me, right?
Now, how do I do
because
it?
Just because I'm not a high priest.
Yeah,
but that
there's
still
still
says,
lessons that you can learn from that.
Absolutely.
So you can't fulfill the high priest commandments in a very literal sense, but there's certainly truth for you in that.
Yes, there is.
And God expects you to find it.
Absolutely.
He doesn't expect me to find your truth.
Correct. Because that's where we're all individuals too.
That's it. Yeah, because we're all one body, but we're all individuals.
Absolutely.
So this becomes our dilemma.
Yes, it does.
Trying to figure this out. So I think with the Shabbat, what you're doing is you're sharing with people, on the one hand, that are non-believers, that the Sabbath day is the day of worship, and you're sharing with Jews and Gentiles that Sabbath day is the day of worship.
I think that's what it means. Absolutely.
The Sabbath is the day for all of us, period.
Well, I think the reason he put the stranger in there is to show just what you said. It's for all of us.
Yeah. I mean, it's even for your cattle.
Even for your cattle.
Your servants, your male. Look at all the categories he has here.
Exactly. It's the only command that's broken down that way.
Your son, your daughter, your male, your female servant, your cattle, and the sojourner.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, nothing and nobody escapes. Sabbath is the Sabbath.
Exactly.
Period. Doesn't matter whether you're an animal or a servant or whoever. Sabbath is Sabbath.
Exactly.
And it's not a Sabbath, as we talked about earlier.
It's the Sabbath.
It's the Sabbath.
Exactly.
Period. So now you figure out how you're supposed to keep it holy.
Absolutely.
Because that's what's incumbent on you.
Absolutely.
It's not incumbent on you not to work. It's incumbent to make it holy.
Correct.
So, if you're going to work, don't do ordinary work. Do holy work.
Absolutely. Which is why the priests are found blameless.
That's exactly why.
Exactly.
It becomes a little easier for me because as a full-time pastor, that's a work day for me. You too. You're an elder.
Absolutely.
Full-time. That's our big. Shabbat's our biggest work day.
Yeah, absolutely.
Spiritually speaking,
busiest day of the week.
It is. So you fulfill it by just doing your normal things. Well, not really normal. They're abnormal. But you know what I'm saying.
Absolutely.
So for all of our listeners, we've got to get the mind of God for how and what. How does this apply to me?
Absolutely.
What do I need to do to fulfill this commandment?
Absolutely. And that's all the time we have for today. But if you want to get either one of Pastor Bruce's books, Healing Your Low Self-Esteem or Preparing for the Father's Gift, please go to www.pastorbrucedowell.com or to amazon.com. And for those of you watching the video, please join us sometimes on Hebrew Nation Radio. And for you on the radio, please come to www.shilomessianic.com and check out our YouTube. So until next time, Shalom.
Shalom.